So, my name is Matt Shell, and we're going to get started. So, today's lesson, we're going to be talking about adding music to your game, subtitle in Unity 5. Unity 5 is out, and it's free. For those of you guys who don't have it yet, you should really grab it. It's pretty awesome. And so, what I'm going to do is I'll give you a quick look at what we're going to be doing at the finished project, and then I'll load up an empty project and we'll dive in. So let's just have a quick look at that, and then we will go for it. Okay, so this is the finished product that we're going to end up with. Very simple, but basically I'll just play the scene. So we've got this trigger volume here that is going to control when our more exciting music starts. So we've got some kind of ambient music, and then this could represent, entering combat or something else happening in your game. I purposefully kept it super generic, so it could be for whatever game type. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be controlling this beautiful new mixer, audio mixer, which has been added in Unity 5. For those of you guys who have done anything with audio, this is really quite a bit like a mixer you would find in like a professional DAW like Logic or Cubase or Ableton. It's really pretty impressive. I've got a background in music and digital audio, and I've just been having a blast working with this thing. So I'll be talking you guys through some of the things that we can do with that. I'm going to keep it, pretty basic since we're introducing new material, but we'll definitely have some time for some questions at the end. If you guys have, more elaborate questions, hopefully I can help with those. All right, so let's just play the scene real quick and see what we've got. So we're using the first-person character controller, the rigid body version. All right, so we can look around, blah, 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 walk forward, and then when we enter the trigger volume, we have this more action-y music, and then when we leave, it's going to fade gradually back out. And as you can see, if you take a look at the mixer while that's happening, you can see the faders moving down there. And we've also got these stings that play. To kind of cover up the transition and to give the transition a little bit more immediacy. So that's what we're going to be making. And we're going to be making that from a empty project. So let me just put my title card up for a sec while I switch it up. So we've got here our blank 3D default project with our nice new procedural skybox for Unity 5. And so we're just going to start laying out super basic scenes. So we're just going to create a new 3D game object, a cube, and we're going to scale it. We'll make it 100 by 1 by 100. So 100 on the X and on the Z. And then we're going to make it negative 0.5 on the Y, just to line it up with the ground, with 0. And we're going to label that ground. And then the cube that's in here, this will be 10 by 10. There's really no point to this. It's just to give us some orientation, so we're not just looking at the horizon, so we can kind of see where we're walking to. Totally non-functional. We'll call that box, and then we're going to make another one, which is going to be our trigger. Create 3D object, game object, 3D object, cube. And this one will be 10 by 1 by 10. And this we're going to make a material for. So let's create a new folder called materials. It's going to have, we could really call it material, singular. It's only going to have one material, and we'll call this red trigger. So I just went to create material and then called it red trigger. And so this is actually using the new standard shader. That's the default now in Unity 5. And so in order to make it transparent, what we're going to do is we are going to change the rendering mode to transparent. And we're going to change the albedo color, which if you've worked with what we're now calling the legacy shader from Unity 4 is basically the diffuse color. It's sort of the main color of the material, and we're going to make that red. And then we are going to, we're going to make it red, and we're going to take the alpha and pull it down quite a bit to maybe 68 or so. And this is going to allow us to make a transparent red material, which we are going to drag onto the last cube that we created. Boop. There we go. And we'll call this trigger zone. While we're at it, we're going to set the isTrigger parameter of our box collider to isTrigger, right? So we're going to make this a trigger, meaning it will not stop the player from colliding with it, right? We'll be able to walk in and out of it, but it will register the collisions for our script, which is what we're going to use to transition between our mixer states. We're also going to import an asset from the standard assets. Now, when you downloaded Unity 5, you should have been given a choice to download the standard assets. And if you did, you will now have these menus here. We are going to import the characters package. If you forgot to download it initially, like me, you can just rerun the installer and you can download the standard assets by themselves. Just make sure they're in the Unity editor folder, in the applications folder, or, well, let's see, that's on a Mac. But yeah, they should land in the right place if you haven't changed your folder structure. Okay, and then here in the import package dialog, we're just going to hit import. And this will create a new folder called standard assets with our various character controllers. We're going to use the rigid body character controller. Okay, so then we're going to go into our characters folder inside standard assets, go to first person character, and grab within prefabs our rigid body FPS controller. We're going to see that the camera is going to change, right? And we're going to take this guy and rotate him around. Let's go to our scene view and set him up so that he's looking at the front of our, I think this is where we want to, whoa. A little crazy there. Let's reset the position. There we go. Just put him up a little higher there. Okay. So he's looking at our little scene here. And alrighty. So now that's our kind of very basic version of our scene. And now what we need to do is we need to add we're going to add a game object which is going to hold our audio sources and play our music. And we are going to make that a child of the main camera, which is in turn a child of the rigid body FPS controller. We can delete our original main camera. We're no longer using it. And let's go to game object. Let's do it from the camera. Game object, create empty child. And here we're going to add two audio sources. We'll call this music player. We're going to add two audio sources, one to play the loud version, the action version of the music, and one to play the quiet version. And so we're going to go ahead and add an audio source. We're going to set it, we're going to keep the play on awake, which is the default, which just means it's going to start playing when the scene starts. But we're also going to check loop, because it's a piece of music, we want it to loop continuously, right? Not just play once and stop. Like we would, a sound effect, we might want to just play once and stop. But for music, generally speaking, we want it to loop. Okay, now I actually don't have my audio clips imported yet. Let me just grab those real quick. I'm going to make a folder called audio. And open that up. And so we've got 4 audio assets here. In this case, these are AIF files. You could also use WAV files. And so what we've got, I'll just play them for you. We've got the action loop, which is the, well, actually, you know what? These are going to be really loud. I'll play them in the sources. I can turn the volume down. We've got the action loop, which is just the drums and the bass. We've got the quiet loop, which is just the arpeggio and the pad. And then we've got these 2 stings, which are our little sting sound effects. So let's add our first audio clip, which is going to be our quiet loop. So I'm using the circle select button to bring this up. And then I'm going to select the quiet loop here, double click on it to select it. And then I'm going to set the volume. I'm going to turn it down. And in fact, since you guys were saying it was loud, let's turn it down quite a bit. We'll set it to half its original volume. And then we are going to copy this component and paste component as new so that we now have two with the same settings. And now we're just going to change. We're going to click the circle select and change to our action loop. There we go. Alrighty. Now if we play that, we should hear both of those playing at the same time. Very good. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our audio mixer asset, which we're going to use to control the levels of these at runtime. So the audio mixer asset is a new type of asset in Unity 5, which is what we view in the audio mixer window. So we're going to go in our audio folder. We're going to go create audio mixer. Let me just take a look at the chat real quick, make sure I'm not going off the rails. And we'll label this music mixer. See how you guys are doing. Lord of mercy. All right, let's turn it down quite a bit more. We'll put them at 25%. All righty. You guys might have your volume up too loud, by the way. There we go. All right. Let's see how that does. Okay, so now that we've created our music mixer asset, let's double click it. And now we can view it in the audio mixer window. You can also access the audio mixer window by going Window, Audio Mixer, or Command 8 or Control 8 on Windows. And so what we've got over here are, we can see a list of the mixers in the project, right? Right now we have only the music mixer, but you can actually have multiple mixers which can connect to each other. And if we have some time at the end, I'll show you how to do that. We have snapshots. Now, snapshots are a feature we're going to use in this tutorial. Basically, what they do is they allow us to save the state of the mixer. So let's say we've set our levels for our combat part of our game, and then we've set our levels for the quiet part. We can store those level settings in a snapshot and recall them via script at runtime, which we're going to do in a moment. So right now, we just have the default snapshot. And notice that it's called the start snapshot, which has a star. If you want to change which that is, you can right-click on the snapshot and choose Set as Start Snapshot. This is the one that will play when the scene first plays. Groups down here these are groups. So in this case, this is the master group. In other software, you might call them channels. In this case, this mixer only has a master group, meaning that anything that's routed through this mixer will have to be routed through the master. We're going to add some additional groups. Well, we might as well do that now. We're going to go ahead and hit the plus button here. And we'll call this first one Quiet. So this is going to be the group that we're going to route our quiet music loop through. And then we're going to make another one. Now, before I do that, notice that when I created the quiet group, I had the master group highlighted. So what this does is the quiet group is now a child of the master. And so that means that any audio playing in the quiet group will be routed through the master before it goes out to the audio listener, in this case attached to the main camera here, which is going to in turn route it to the headphones or speakers or whatever your player is listening on, the main output. So I'm going to create another group for the action loop, and that is going to also be a child of master. So we're going to highlight the master and hit the plus button, and this is going to be called action. So now action flows into master, child flows into master. If I turn the master down, I'm going to turn both of those down at the same time. I can alter each one of them individually. All right, so now that we've got that set, let's go ahead and route our audio sources to their respective groups. So we're going to go back to our music player, and we are going to use the output parameter here to select where they're going to be routed to. So right now, they're just going directly to the audio listener on the camera, right? They're not getting processed through any mixer. They're just going directly out to the audio listener, which is the default. If you never use any of this, that's just always how it's going to behave. But if we want to, we can insert this audio mixer chain, which is going to process the signal before it goes to the audio listener and gives us much finer control over the sound in our game. So we're going to go ahead and click the circle select button for the output parameter, and we're going to choose for our quiet loop audio source, we're going to choose the quiet group of our music mixer. Double click to select, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the action loop. And double click to select that. Okay, so now if we play our scene, I'm going to turn down the master as well, just in case, so nobody else gets their ears blown out. Let's see how that's doing. So now we can see we've got audio going into our quiet group, we've got audio going into our action group, and they're both going in turn to the master. So if I want to change these while it's playing, I can hit edit in play mode, turn everything down, now, importantly, it's worth noting the audio mixer is an asset. So any changes we make at runtime are saved. Notice I turned down the action group and stopped the scene. It didn't reset, right? Unlike the hierarchy, our FPS controller reset, right? But the mixer did not because it's an asset, right? So just like if you're editing a material at runtime, those changes will be saved. If we're editing a mixer, that will be saved as well. And to edit that, I hit the edit in play button, edit in play mode button in order to make changes to the mixer, which will then be written to the mixer and saved. Now that we've got our signals routed, what we're going to do is we're going to create our audio mixer snapshots. So we've got our default snapshot here, and by pulling down the action loop, that's actually the state I want it to be in, right? This is, I want, when we start the game, I want just the quiet loop to be playing, not the action loop. So that's actually good for the first snapshot. Let's just rename it. I'm going to click on the name, and we'll call it quiet. And then I'm going to create a new snapshot. And now notice, because I had quiet highlighted, it copied the quiet snapshot, which is fine. I'm going to call this action, and I'm going to turn back up the action loop. Now, if we play the scene, edit in play mode, we can recall the action snapshot when we click on the snapshot name. And we can also do that via scripting at runtime, which is what we're going to do next. I'll just go over views real quick. The last thing that we have here are views. These just allow us to control how much stuff is displayed in a given mixer. Let's say I want to make a new view. I'll just call it just master. We can hide the our two channels in this view and then see them in this view, right? So it's just to keep the view organized, kind of like screen sets. All right, so now that we've got our snapshots created, we've got our basic scene set up. We haven't done the stings yet. I'll do those in a moment. We'll loop back once we get the transitioning going with the script. We'll set up the stings. Let's write our script that's going to control this. So we're going to jump back over to our project view. We will create a folder called scripts. Really, it's just one script. We don't really need a folder, but this is just best practice. And we'll call this Combat Music Control. All right, so let's get this script going. So the first thing that we're going to do in here is we're going to add the UnityEngine.audio namespace so that we can access members of that namespace, in this case, audio mixer snapshot. So we're going to put using UnityEngine.audio. And we're going to start by adding some public variables. The first is going to be, we're going to declare our two audio mixer snapshots, which I've called out of combat and in combat. And they're going to be public. So we're going to say public audio mixer snapshot out of combat and in combat. And so these are going to be public variables so we can drag in or otherwise select our audio mixer snapshot assets and reference them from the script. All right, then we are going to have an array of audio clips for our stings. So we just have two stings, but this is going to allow us to randomly select which sting is played, so it's not the same sound every time. All right, so we're going to have a public array of audio clips called stings, and we're also going to have a public audio source called sting source. We haven't actually made this source yet, but I'm just going to put it in here now so I don't have to double back later. Then we are going to have a public float called BPM, and we're going to initialize that to 128, in this case, beats per minute. BPM is the way that we measure tempo in music. I happen to know that the tempo of this is 128. This is kind of optional, but I find that it makes the fades a little nicer if they're fading in time with the music. It prevents having like weird, awkward fades. So we're just going to fade based on the tempo of the music. But again, you could omit this if you didn't, for example, have the tempo of the music. But I'm pretty sure there are you can find like tap tempo calculators online and stuff if you need to find the tempo of some strange music that you don't know. All right, then we're going to have some private variables. So we're going to have a private float called m_transition in. Now the m underscore is something that we're using now just to identify, m is short for member, that we're using to identify private variables, just so that if you're reading through your code, it makes it a little bit more readable. You can kind of see the scope just by looking at the variable name. It's something we haven't been doing before, but we're going to start doing from here on out. So we're going to have m transition in and m transition out. And so what these are going to be are the time in milliseconds to fade the music, to transition from our quiet to our action snapshots, and then back again for transition out. So we're going to fade in over this amount of time and then fade out over the transition out amount of time. We're also going to have a private float m_quarter note. This is just where I'm going to store the length of a quarter note at 120 BPM, which I'm going to calculate right here in the start function. So we're just going to do a little stuff to calculate the BPM and then use that to generate our transition times. Again, you could just kind of like eyeball this and just choose some numbers that work for you, but I don't know, I like it better this way. So we're going to say m quarter note equals 60 divided by BPM, right? So BPM is beats per minute, right? So there's 60 seconds in a minute. And so we're going to divide 60 by BPM to get the length of a quarter note in milliseconds. We're then going to use that to calculate our transition in time. So this is going to be equal to m quarter note, just m quarter note times 1 in this case. So 1 quarter note. So we're going to fade in over the length of 1 quarter note, which here I think is 225 milliseconds, something like that. And then we are going to fade out over the length of, transition out is going to be equal to quarter note times 32. So actually 8 bars. So kind of a long fade out. I felt it just sounded better. You want to fade in quickly and then fade out slowly. You could use a single transition variable depending on your game, but I felt like having an in transition and an out transition would work better with the music. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to delete our update function because we don't need it. We're going to detect our collision with the trigger, right? So, or we're going to do something when we collide with the trigger. And what we're going to do is we're going to transition to our in combat snapshot. So we're going to check if the tag that we collided with is the tag that's attached to our trigger, which I actually forgot to set up. Maybe we'll set that up now. Here, let's do that first. Okay, so let's jump back to the editor for a second. Missed a step. Okay, so the trigger zone right now is set to untagged, and what we want to do is we're going to give it a unique tag so that when the player collides with it, we can check against that tag and then do relevant stuff. So we're going to click on tag here, choose add tag, and here our tag list is currently empty. We're going to hit plus and tag it with, or actually let's call it combat zone, which I think is what I called it before. So now we've added the combat zone custom tag to our project, and then we just need to apply it to the trigger zone. So then we're just going to go back. See, now combat zone has been added to our list. Choose it, and now we're going to be able to check if the object that we or the trigger that we collided with has that tag using a compare tag. So we're going to use onTriggerEnter to do this. So we're going to say void onTriggerEnter. OnTriggerEnter takes a parameter of the type collider, which we're going to call other. And then we're going to use an if statement to say if other.compare tag, right? So we're going to say, we're going to compare the tag of the collider that we collided with. If that is combat zone, then we are going to transition to our audio mixer snapshot in combat. So the way, this is something new in Unity 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to say in combat dot transition to. So transition to is a new function in the audio scripting API. And so it takes a parameter of the type float time to reach, which is in milliseconds, right? So we're going to call transition to, and we're going to pass in, perhaps you guessed it, our transition in float, right? So we're going to transition to the in combat snapshot over the length transition in, which is, yeah, something like 225 milliseconds. All right, then we're going to do something very similar using onTriggerExit, right? So we're just going to check if the collider that the trigger that we just exited, same syntax, right? So we're going to say if other.compare tag combat zone again. In this case, we're going to transition to out of combat. So we're going to say out of combat dot transition to and pass it the parameter transition out. There we go. And that should be working. Let's save it. Jump back over to the editor. And we're going to assign it to our rigid body FPS controller, right? Because that's got the capsule collider that we're going to use to detect the collision with the trigger. So we're going to assign it there. And we could just drag it on. Shaboop. And then we just need to assign our public variables. We'll do the stings in a minute. Our audio mixer snapshots, you can do this either using the circle select. Out of combat is going to be quiet. Or you can go unfold the audio mixer and drag in the action snapshot. And that should be working. Let's try it. Let's put the mixer on screen so we can see it. Yeah, so we can hear it. It fades in. And then it fades out when we exit. So let's try it again. Very nice. Now, it's worth mentioning, I'm doing the really simplest version of this, right? But we could have 20 channels in here. We could have different effects, and all of that would be interpolated between, right? So don't just think this is for fading levels. You can interpolate between any mixer settings. So some, interesting creative possibilities there beyond just fading levels. I'm showing fading levels because I want to keep it simple for this first introduction. But yeah, and also worth mentioning that I've done a series of, I think there's 8 lessons on the Unity YouTube channel going more in depth on all of these, on snapshots, mixers, effects, etc. Okay, so let's do the stings. So I'm going to add actually a child object to music player. So I'm going to highlight music player, choose create empty child. And we're going to call this sting player. We're going to add an audio source to it, add component, audio source. Whoops, not that. This is not going to play on awake because we don't want our sound to play when the scene starts. It's also not going to loop, right, because it's a sting. It's a one-shot sound that just plays when the event happens. All right, we are going to set up a group for these. Let's go over to groups, highlight master, and make a new group called stings. And that we're going to want to be at 0 or unity, no pun intended. Unity in audio just means it's not louder, it's not quieter, it's at 0. The mixer is not adding or subtracting volume. So we're going to want that to be at 0 or unity gain. And then let's add, we're going to drag our sting player object to our sting source, right, to say this is the audio source we want to play from, because we don't want it to interrupt either of our other music sources. And then we're going to add our files to our stings array. So we're going to go project, grab sting1, drag it to the array to add it, and sting2, drop it in the array as well. And of course you could add lots of these, and the way I'm going to write the code, it doesn't matter the number of elements you have. All right, so speaking of writing the code, that should be good. Oh, let's assign the output to our stings group. So circle select on the output parameter, select stings, the group stings for music mixer, shaboop, and then let's jump back to our old friend monodevelop here, and we are going to add another private function. This is just going to be called play sting. So it's going to return void. It's going to be called play sting. No parameters. And what it's going to do is, first of all, so what we're going to do is we're going to generate a random number, which is between 0 and the length of our array stings. Basically, we're going to choose a random index from that array, choose one of the sounds randomly. We're going to assign it to our audio source, and then we're going to play our audio source. So first of all, we're going to say int randclip equals random.range. This is something I love to use and use all the time. Lots of fun. Look it up. Stings dot length. So it's going to be between 0 and the number of elements in our stings array. All right. So basically, in this case, between 0 and 1. Now, and random.range excludes the last number. So the length is 2. This is going to give us a value between 0 and 1. All right. Now we're going to set the clip of sting source. So we're going to say sting source dot clip equals our stings array rand clip. So the element at the index rand clip in our stings array, we're going to choose and set to the to be the clip of sting source, and then we're going to say sting source dot play. We're going to play the sound. And lastly, we want to play our play sting function, or we want to call our play sting function in on trigger enter, right? So we're going to once we started transitioning, we're going to call play sting. Alrighty, save, jump back to the editor, and now that should be good. Let's give it a try. Put the mixer up. There we go. Oh, it's super loud. Sorry if I zapped your ears. Let's set Sting player as the same level as everybody else. So worth noting, right, you can set the level at the source. I could also set it in the mixer, right, but then I would need to set it for each of the snapshots. And since all of these are at Unity, that seems cleaner to me. But, you know, you can have it whichever way you like. Just general advice, mix-wise, I would just try to pick one and stick to it, right? So I'm kind of setting the level, the initial level here, and then keeping these at 0. You know, keep your mix organized. Okay, so let's try it again. There we go. Played our other sample. So really the purpose of this is just that it's covering that fade, right? So if we turn it off, we kind of hear the fade. And so, like so. The fade is not always happening at a time that's like musically great. And that's because we want to have our clips in sync with each other, right? We want to start them both at the same time so that they're always looping in sync, so that we fade in the action loop, it's in time with the quiet loop, right? We want to keep these always in sync. We just want to fade between them, right? But the player is not going to wait until a musically appropriate point to start the combat, right? So we're using the sting to kind of cover the fact that we're not starting on the 1, right? We're starting in the middle of the bar, but the sting kind of covers that up. I also designed these music loops for this purpose so that you could kind of fade in anywhere in the middle of them and it wouldn't sound super weird. It wouldn't be in the middle of a melody or something. So that's just something to think about and maybe to talk about with your composer, or to think about if you're writing the music yourself, that, you know, if you're going to be fading in and out of loops, you maybe don't want to be like fading in and out in the middle of a 4-bar progression or something, because it might sound kind of weird. Anyway, those are kind of more musical questions, but, you know, it matters. So something to think about there. And that is basically our show for today. Just coming up on 5 o'clock New York time, so not bad timing-wise. So I'm going to hang out and answer some questions first about this. Then if you have other questions about audio in Unity 5, I'm happy to talk about those as well a little bit. And, you know, and then if we have a little time at the end, I can talk about some other stuff. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching.